The sun dipped low over the endless Montana sky, painting the rolling hills in strokes of crimson and gold, as Elias Thorne guided his weathered pickup truck down the dusty backroad toward his ranch. It was just another evening in the life of a man who'd long ago traded dreams for duty, 30 years of wrangling cattle, mending fences, and whispering apologies to the wind for the family he'd lost to the bottle and the bottle's cruel aftermath. Elias was a giant of a man, broad-shouldered and calloused, with eyes like storm clouds that had seen too many droughts. But on this particular dusk, as the truck's headlights sliced through the gathering twilight, they caught something unnatural, a flash of white against the sagebrush, a crumpled form that didn't belong to the land. He slammed on the brakes, heart pounding like a spooked stallion's hooves. Throwing open the door, Elias stumbled out, boots crunching gravel as he sprinted toward the figure. There, half buried in the thorny underbrush, lay a woman no more than 30, her dark hair matted with dirt and blood, her simple sundress torn and muddied. She was clutching her side, breath coming in shallow gasps, and as Elias knelt beside her, her eyelids fluttered open. Those eyes, deep brown, like the rich earth after a rain, locked onto his with a desperation that pierced straight through his armored soul. "It hurts," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread unraveling in the wind. "Please, it hurts so much." Elias's world narrowed to that whisper, a sound that echoed the ghosts of his past, the faint cries of his late wife, Sarah, in her final hours, begging for the pain to stop. He scooped the woman up as gently as if she were a newborn foal, her body light and trembling against his chest. "Hold on, darlin'," he murmured, his voice rough as sandpaper but laced with a tenderness he'd buried deep. Cradling her in the truck's cab, he floored the accelerator toward the nearest town, the 10 miles feeling like a lifetime. Her name, she managed to gasp between winces, was Lila. No last name, no explanations, just pain and a plea that clawed at the edges of his resolve. By the time they reached Mercy General in Billings, the ER was a blur of white coats and beeping machines. Lila had lost consciousness on the drive, her hand limp in Elias's calloused grip. The doctors swarmed, stitching gashes from what looked like a brutal fall or worse, an attack, and diagnosing cracked ribs and internal bruising. "She's lucky you found her when you did, Mr. Thorne," the lead physician said, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "A few more hours out there, and—" He trailed off, shaking his head. Elias nodded numbly, sinking into a vinyl chair in the waiting room, the sterile scent of antiseptic mingling with the faint aroma of hay still clinging to his flannel shirt. Lucky? He wasn't so sure. Fate had a way of dragging old wounds to the surface, and as he stared at the coffee stain on the linoleum floor, memories flooded back, Sarah's laughter in the ranch house kitchen, the way she'd tease him about his stubborn streak, and the hollow silence that followed her overdose 5 years ago. He'd poured himself into the land after that, building walls higher than his corrals, convincing himself solitude was salvation. Dawn crept in through the hospital blinds when Lila stirred. Elias hadn't left her side, dozing fitfully in that chair, a styrofoam cup of cold coffee clutched like a lifeline. She turned her head, wincing, and found him there, his Stetson tipped low over his brow, jaw set in quiet vigil. You're still here," she whispered, her voice hoarse but stronger, laced with wonder. Elias straightened, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "Ain't got nowhere better to be." It was a lie, of course. The ranch waited, with its endless chores and unspoken loneliness. But something in her gaze held him fast, a vulnerability that mirrored his own, unspoken and raw. Over the next few days, as Lila healed under the fluorescent hum of the ward, fragments of her story emerged like wildflowers pushing through cracked soil. She was from Seattle, a city girl with a backpacker's spirit, who'd come to Montana chasing whispers of freedom after a life that had chewed her up and spit her out. A toxic marriage, a husband whose love turned to fists when the whiskey flowed. She'd fled west on a Greyhound bus, hitchhiking the last leg, dreaming of reinvention. But dreams have thorns, a wrong turn on a back road, a storm that swelled the creek, and a treacherous slip down an embankment. "I thought that was it," she confessed one afternoon, as sunlight slanted through the window and danced on the floor stand. Lying there, feeling the cold seep in. "I kept thinking about all the what-ifs. What if I'd stayed? What if I'd fought harder?" Her fingers twisted the bedsheet, eyes distant. Elias listened, his silence a balm, offering nods and the occasional gruff insight drawn from his own scars. "Pain's a teacher, Lila. Mean one, but it shows you what you're made of." The town buzzed with the tale of the rancher's rescue, as small places do. At the feed store, old-timers slapped Elias on the back, calling him a hero. "Thorns gone soft," they'd chuckle, but there was pride in their eyes, a reminder of the man he'd been before grief turned him inward. His ranch hands, a ragtag crew of locals who'd stuck by him through lean years, ribbed him gently over lukewarm beers at the Roadhouse Saloon. "Boss, you plannin' on adoptin' every stray now?" young Tommy joked, but Elias just stared into his pint, the weight of unspoken words pressing down. Truth was, Lila's presence had cracked something open in him, a fissure through which light and longing leaked. He'd visit daily, bringing wildflowers from the ranch's untamed meadow or a thermos of his mama's chili recipe, watching her laugh at his stories of ornery steers and starlit cattle drives. In those moments, the hospital room felt less like a cage and more like a confessional, where two broken souls traded pieces of themselves. Yet, as Lila's bruises faded to yellow echoes, so did the ease between them. Discharge day loomed, and with it, the reality of her transience. "I can't impose on you forever," she said one evening, packing her meager belongings into a duffel bag. Elias leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, the Stetson shadowing his face. "Impose? Darlin', the ranch has more empty rooms than regrets." It was meant as a jest, but it landed heavy, laced with the ache of his empty king-sized bed and the echo of Sarah's voice in the halls. Lila paused, her hand on the zipper, eyes searching his. "Why are you doing this, Elias? You don't even know me." He swallowed hard, the words he'd rehearsed dissolving on his tongue. "Because sometimes, knowin' ain't the point. Feelin' is." She came to the ranch that very afternoon, the truck rumbling up the gravel drive under a sky heavy with promise. Thorn Ranch sprawled like a living heartbeat, acres of golden grass waving in the breeze, a red barn weathered by decades of blizzards, and a wraparound porch where Elias had proposed to Sarah under a harvest moon. Lila stepped out, inhaling the scent of pine and earth, her city-worn sneakers sinking into the dirt. "It's beautiful," she breathed, turning in a slow circle. Elias watched her, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. For the first time in years, the land felt alive again, not just endured. He showed her to the guest room upstairs, its quilt handmade by his grandmother, the window framing the crazy mountains like a painting. "Rest up. Tomorrow, I'll introduce you to the crew. They bite less than the coyotes." Life on the ranch wove them into its rhythm with surprising gentleness. Lila, stronger by the day, insisted on helping, first with small tasks, like feeding the chickens or weeding the herb garden Sarah had planted. Her hands, soft from office drudgery back in Seattle, blistered under the sun, but she laughed through the sting, her spirit a spark that ignited the mundane. Elias found himself lingering after chores, sharing supper under the porch light, stories flowing like the creek after thaw. He told her of his boyhood, racing horses barefoot across these fields. She shared dreams of opening a little bookstore someday, shelves groaning with tales of far-off places. In the quiet hours, when the stars wheeled overhead like scattered diamonds, their conversations turned deeper, confessions of regrets, fears of unworthiness. "I thought love was a trap," Lila admitted one night, her voice barely above the cricket's chorus. "But here, it feels like coming home." Elias's heart stuttered, but he said nothing, afraid that naming the feeling would shatter it. The unexpected turn came on a crisp October morning, 2 weeks after her arrival, when the first frost kissed the pumpkins in the patch. Elias was in the barn, oiling saddles, when Tommy burst in, face pale as milk. "Boss, you gotta see this. Riders coming up the drive, looks like trouble." Elias stepped out, squinting against the glare, and felt ice settle in his veins. 3 men on horseback, dust-caked and grim, led by a figure he recognized all too well, Harlan Crow, the land developer who'd been circling Thorn Ranch like a vulture for months. Harlan was all polished boots and silver-tongued promises, representing a consortium from back east eager to carve up Montana's heartland into luxury retreats for city folk weary of their concrete cages. "Elias, my friend," Harlan called, dismounting with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Heard you had company. Thought I'd drop by, discuss that offer again." The crew gathered at a wary distance, pitchforks and ropes in hand, but Elias waved them off, striding forward with the calm of a man facing a storm he'd long anticipated. Lila, drawn by the commotion, emerged from the house, her hair tousled from sleep, a mug of coffee steaming in her hands. Harlan's gaze flicked to her, sharpening like a blade. "And who's this lovely addition? Not plannin' on turning the ranch into a bed and breakfast, are ya?" The jab landed, but it was the ranch awoke to a symphony of chaos at first light, the sheriff's siren slicing through the mist like a knife through butter. Elias stood on the porch, arms crossed over his flannel shirt, his face a mask of weathered oak, unyielding, yet etched with the lines of quiet defiance. Lena, pale as the morning fog, hovered behind him, her casted arm clutched to her side, eyes wide with the terror of cornered prey. Deputy Ramirez stepped out first, her boots thudding authoritatively, followed by 2 uniformed officers and a stone-faced detective from Lincoln. "Elias Thorne," Ramirez began, her voice laced with regret, "we're here for the girl. No trouble if you cooperate." The air crackled with tension, the cattle lowing uneasily in the distance as if sensing the fracture in their world. But Elias didn't budge. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled envelope, the bank's response to his desperate plea, arrived by courier at dawn. "Cooperate," he echoed, his voice steady as the Rockies. "Ma'am, I've been cooperating my whole life. Paid taxes, buried friends, watched this land bleed dry while suits in the city tally numbers on paper. But this?" He thrust the envelope forward, and Ramirez took it warily, unfolding the single sheet. Her eyes scanned the words, widening in disbelief, "Deed transfer complete. Double T Ranch conveyed to Magdalena Ruiz in full settlement of all debts. Effective immediately." Gasps rippled through the group like wind through wheat. The detective snatched the paper, his mustache twitching in outrage. "What the hell is this, Thorne? You can't just, she's a flight risk. This is obstruction." But Elias held up a hand, his gaze locking onto Lena's, conveying a lifetime of unspoken promises in a single look. "Obstruction? No, sir. This is justice. Lena here's more rancher than I'll ever be now. She sees the heart in this place, the way the soil clings to life after a frost, the way a foal stands on shaky legs come spring. I signed it over because sometimes, holding on hurts more than letting go." The revelation hung heavy, shocking the deputies into stunned silence. Whispers erupted, Ramirez murmuring into her radio, the detective sputtering about legality and fraud. But Elias had anticipated the storm. His lawyer, old Tom Hargrove from town, pulled up in a dusty sedan moments later, briefcase in hand and a notarized affidavit waving like a white flag. "It's ironclad," Tom declared, his voice booming with the authority of decades in dusty courtrooms. "Elias here paid off the mortgage with his savings, every last penny from 40 years of sweat. The ranch is hers, free and clear. As for the warrant, well, Lena's turning herself in, but with a deal. Community service on the Double T, under Elias's watch. Her ex? He's dropping charges, turns out, the bruises ran both ways, and the DA's got a soft spot for second chances." Lena's knees buckled, tears carving clean paths down her dust-streaked cheeks as the truth sank in. Elias had given her not just a home, but a horizon, a sprawling testament to redemption, wrapped in barbed wire and boundless sky. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, the shock rippling outward like a stone skipped across a still pond. Here was a man who'd bartered his legacy for a stranger's freedom, turning a tale of flight into one of fierce belonging. As handcuffs clicked softly around her wrists, not for capture, but for a ceremonial march to the cruiser, Lena turned to Elias, her whisper fierce against the dawn. "Why? You barely know me." Elias cupped her face gently, his thumbs brushing away tears, the gesture echoing Clara's tender touches in the quiet hours of their youth. "Darlin', I know enough. I know what it costs to whisper it hurts and have no one listen. And I know that humanity? It's not in the taking, it's in the giving, even when it leaves you standing in the dust." Profound realization dawned in her eyes then, a mirror to his own epiphany. Selflessness wasn't loss, it was the seed that bloomed unexpected gardens. The ranch, once his prison of memories, now pulsed with new life, a sanctuary for the wandering, the wounded, the whispers of the heart. Word spread like wildfire across the county, igniting headlines in the Casper Star-Tribune. Rancher's radical gift shocks Wyoming, fugitive finds freedom in fields. Neighbors who'd long dismissed Elias as the grizzled recluse showed up with pies and pitchforks, offering hands to mend what time had frayed. Lena, released on her own recognizance with the DA's blessing, returned to the Double T not as a guest, but as its beating heart. Under Elias's guidance, she learned the rhythms of the land, branding irons at dusk, irrigation lines at dawn, while he, unburdened, discovered the lightness of reinvention. They planted a community garden in Clara's honor, inviting folks from town to till the soil and share stories of scars turned to strength. The ex faded into irrelevance, his threats dissolving like mist under the sun of collective resolve. Months later, as autumn gilded the aspens in gold, Elias and Lena stood atop the ridge overlooking the valley, the herd grazing contentedly below. She'd healed not just the breaks in bone, but the fractures in spirit, and in her, he'd found not replacement, but renewal. "You shocked the world, old man," she teased, linking her arm through his, the cast long discarded. Elias grinned, the lines around his eyes crinkling like well-worn leather. "Nah, darlin'. I just listened to a whisper. And in this big, hurting world, sometimes that's all it takes to mend what's broken." In the end, the Double T Ranch stood not as a monument to one man's toil, but as a beacon of boundless kindness, a reminder that true power lies in the quiet acts of generosity that ripple outward, transforming strangers into family, pain into purpose. And as the stars wheeled overhead, vast and forgiving, Elias knew, hope wasn't a fleeting visitor, it was the very ground we walk on, waiting for feet brave enough to tread it lightly, lovingly, anew.